Hello everyone, I'm Ruth Wasserman Lande. It is July 17th, 2024, and this is the live daily briefing of the Israeli Citizen Spokespersons Office. We're live on Instagram, X, YouTube, and LinkedIn. Please follow us on all our platforms and start submitting questions. I also invite you to follow me on my personal platforms, Ruth Wasserman Lande. Yesterday, the families of 5 Israeli women were abducted by Hamas terrorists on October 7th, released images showing their first days in captivity in Gaza. The images are difficult to look at. In one image, Liri Albag, Karina Arayev, Agam Berger, and Daniela Gilboa are seen sitting on mattresses on the floor. Another image shows Eylon Levy with a swollen eye and cuts on her face, the same Eylon Levy who begged her captors to let her phone her friends in Gaza because she was a peace activist and was last seen being dragged out of a pickup truck in bloodied pants. These are signs of life that the Israeli public, until yesterday, had not seen. The images were reportedly taken from a Hamas video that the IDF obtained during operations in Gaza. The video, which had not been released, was first shown to the hostages' families just a few months ago. I thought about these images as I read the new Human Rights Watch report on Hamas's barbaric atrocities. We did not really need a Human Rights Watch report 9 months after October 7th to know that Hamas perpetrated barbaric atrocities. And since then, by the way, Human Rights Watch has done more than any other Western NGO to demonize Israel and to pressure it to end this war with the aggressor, Hamas, so that it may continue to fight again. But there is a part of the Human Rights Watch report you should read. Human Rights Watch sent questions to Hamas terrorists themselves about the October 7th massacre. A senior Hamas terrorist, Bassem Naim, sent a reply. One sentence particularly stands out because it's so ridiculous, it's almost funny. It says Hamas is committed to respecting international and human rights law. It is a shocking claim that Hamas respects international law. Hamas terrorists gunned down hundreds of people at a music festival. Which international law allows that? Hamas death squads went house to house in places like Kfar Aza and Be'eri and massacred innocent people in their own homes. Which international law allows for that? Hamas took 251 hostages back to Gaza. Which international law allows that? I don't think anyone in Hamas has ever read a single clause of a single international law. Article 34 of the 4th Geneva Convention is clear. The taking of hostages is prohibited. Hamas took hostages. Of course Hamas is violating international law. Hamas sometimes claims that it is not holding hostages, but in fact prisoners of war. These include 2 children, which are still trapped in the terror dungeons, Ariel and Kfir Bibas. They can't be considered prisoners of war, nor can their parents, Shiri and Yarden. They're hostages. And even if we accept, for the sake of argument, the absurd claim that Hamas is holding prisoners of war, Hamas has refused to allow the Red Cross to visit them. That is illegal. The 3rd Geneva Convention requires that parties to an armed conflict grant the Red Cross immediate access to all prisoners of war and the right to visit them wherever they are held. Hamas has refused to let the Red Cross visit a single hostage. It's a clear violation of international law that Hamas claims to respect. Senior Hamas terrorist Bassem Naim claims that Hamas respects international law. That is a lie. On October 7th, Hamas death squads gunned down hundreds of people at a music festival, massacred families in their own homes, took 251 hostages back to Gaza and committed unspeakable sexual atrocities. These crimes against humanity are blatant violations of international law. Hamas knows that it can lie about its crimes because it knows that its friends will remain quiet. You know, Hamas knows that UNRWA will ignore its crimes because UNRWA is a Hamas front. Hamas knows that the World Health Organization will remain silent as it wages war out of hospitals. Hamas knows that students on American campuses will celebrate its atrocities as resistance by any means necessary. Hamas should not be able to get away with saying with a straight face that it respects international law, while at the same time it broadcasts its many crimes. Is that too much to ask? Please let me know in your comments, and I'd be more than happy to take any questions.
Our first question today comes from Rachel on Instagram Live, who asks, how close are we to dismantling Hamas, and how is the search for hostages going? Are we close?
Thank you so much, Rachel, for that question. So, first of all, the IDF is performing extraordinarily well. In fact, urban warfare experts have keep saying that, in fact, what the IDF is doing will be learned in different war colleges throughout the world in terms of not hurting civilians in their combat and warfare. And yet the successes in terms of eliminating Hamas combatants are significant. Yet we still have Hamas combatants to kill. So more or less half of the Hamas senior leadership has been eliminated. The rest are hiding underground in the tunnels and amid civilian population, in fact, endangering their own civilian population during this war. Regarding the hostages, what the Hamas is doing illegally is in fact holding the hostages as human shields because they know that the Israeli IDF will not shoot if they know that there are Israeli hostages around the senior Hamas officials. Yet, we are moving closer. We have taken down significant and senior Hamas leadership members, and I believe we shall reach them all. So thank you for that question, Rachel.
Our next question comes from Jenning5 on Instagram, who asks, has the Red Cross actually tried to access the hostages? Last I heard, they didn't even try.
So they say that they have tried and that the Hamas simply refused to let them close. Now we have to understand, at least in the beginning of the war, the complete and utter undisturbed and unquestionable entity ruling the Gaza Strip was indeed Hamas. You couldn't go anywhere if Hamas didn't want you to. You couldn't say anything if Hamas didn't want you to. You couldn't do anything if Hamas didn't want you to. And yes, there were claims by senior people in the Red Cross that they tried and were refused. If they tried enough, no, because they should have continued to try again and again every single day. That's their job. They have to do this. They have to make sure that people who need medicine and are kept hostage get their medicine. However, it is very difficult to prove whether they actually tried hard enough and just couldn't manage to get through or not. In these more, let's say, advanced stages, Hamas has been weakened, and still the Red Cross needs to continue to push and ask again and again. There's still 120 hostages kept in the Gaza Strip. Not once have the Red Cross been allowed to go anywhere near a hostage, and this is unacceptable. The entire world needs to pressure Hamas to allow the Red Cross to go in and see that these hostages are alive.
Claudia Salem on Instagram asks, how do you answer to people saying that the IDF are killing innocent people in Gaza?
So once more, thank you for that question. There have been senior, world-renowned urban warfare experts, not Jewish, not Israeli. They have no interest in standing behind Israel for simply no reason, have said, different ones from different countries. One of them is John Spencer, a very well-known urban warfare specialist, but there are many, that the Israeli IDF standards of warfare are unprecedented, unheard of, that the actual number of civilians that have been killed, and of course, every civilian that is killed is a tragedy, but this is a war. Hamas knew when it came and murdered, massacred, raped, carnaged people in their own homes, children, babies, raped, gang raped women, and did horrendous atrocities that are not even, I have no ability to even say with words what they have perpetrated. It really goes back to Middle Ages. This is something they knew would entice a retaliation, because no country, no nation in the entire universe would not retaliate, especially since they said, and they say it still openly, publicly, that they would do it again and again and again. Can a government allow for a terrorist organization to carnage, rape, murder, massacre its population? Would America allow for that? Would France allow for that? Of course not. And therefore, the Israeli IDF went inside Gaza to eliminate this threat against its own civilians. Yes, and also some civilians were killed, because that is exactly the purpose of Hamas. That's why they sit in schools and under hospitals and inside hospitals and in civilian, heavily populated centers, particularly in order to gain international support.
Iris at work on Instagram asks simply, what is the current status of the ceasefire?
Well, there isn't a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip. There are talks about a ceasefire if the Hamas terrorist organization would release all of our civilian hostages immediately, and all our hostages in general immediately. There would be no war. There would be a ceasefire. In fact, you don't have to believe me. Let's go back a second to October 6th. There wasn't a war. There wasn't a blockade. UNRWA kept receiving funding from outside. The Rafah crossing, obviously, some of the tunnels dug under there were open, and there was a lot of things going on inside the Gaza Strip. Restaurants were working, jobs were to be had. Of course, the Hamas had better jobs and employment than the other members of the population, but the issue is that there was no war. There is no ceasefire because Hamas is still holding 120 of our own hostages, and they keep saying, we will continue our war against all Israelis, all of the civilians in Israel, women, children, grandmothers, grandfathers, men, and so on. So there is at the moment no ceasefire.
Next question comes from John asking live on Twitter, Hezbollah fired 100 rockets into northern Israel last night. What is the situation there, and is the war intensifying?
So the Hezbollah, as everybody knows, is actually an arm of Iran. These are Shiite militants, heavily armed, funded, encouraged, and taught by Iranian experts, and they are operated by Iran not for the betterment of the Lebanese, nor for the betterment of the Palestinians, rather for the forwarding of interests of Iran and its hegemony in the region. And yes, it's been firing at civilian targets, at installations, at Israel, hundreds of rockets. This is an act of war, casus belli. And this is something that cannot be tolerated by any normal sovereign country. Is it becoming worse? It's bad enough. It's almost as if there is a war already. Will it escalate? Well, that depends. Because if the Hezbollah and Iran continue de facto to wage war against Israel, the government will have to maintain some kind of a peace, some kind of security for its own tens of thousands of displaced Israelis that have moved from their homes in the north of the country. And yes, there will be an escalation, most probably.
Last question today comes from Mel on Instagram, who asks, what is the best way for Americans to help in hostage release efforts?
So the best way for Americans, and thank you so much for asking that, is to create pressure on worldwide organizations, on NGOs, on countries to speak out against Hamas, those that do not respect human rights laws, international law. Humanity in epitome is something that is completely foreign to this terrorist organization. This terrorist organization that cut off heads. This terrorist organization that is openly speaking about the West, America, European Union, Canada, Australia as a foreign and bad entity. So it's not just about Israel and the Jews. It's about the West. It's about the Christians. It's about the Muslims that are not Muslim enough in the opinion of terrorist Hamas. And therefore, the more Americans first understand that the situation is not as Iran is trying to sell and market to the international arena, that Israel is to blame because it's protecting its own civilians. It's about Hamas, but it's also about Iran backing Hamas. It's about Iran backing the Islamic Jihad. It's about Iran backing the Hezbollah. It's about Iran giving arms and teaching and inciting and training terrorist organizations that their objective, and they say it openly, publicly, is to eliminate Western culture, pressure the United States of America, decision makers, media outlets, NGOs, to put pressure on these terrorist entities to stop, whether it's financial, whether it's media-oriented, and I believe it will work. Thank you so much.